In this video I fix a split in the keel of one of my early 70s Sunfish hulls. I had picked up this fish at a garage sale in the neighborhood. On her maiden voyage with me her hull split and I took it upon myself for the first time to repair fiberglass. The split is 10 inches aft of the daggerboard trunk and it's about 12 inches long. The repair is difficult because the split is in the area of the cockpit and is inaccessible from the inside, so it must be done from the outside. I will do this by forming a backing mold of fiberglass over the hull before I cut out the repair area. I will then epoxy my backing mold to the inside of the hull. Next, I fiberglass over the backing mold with several layers of fiberglass and epoxy. Then, I apply a fairing compound over the repair area for a smooth alignment of contours with the adjacent hull. Finally, I seal with epoxy and paint the entire hull. Step 1. To create the backing mold, I first sand down the old paint and gel coat to determine the full extent of the split. I mark with a Sharpie an area of the hull that I will cut out an inch beyond the split lengthwise by 6 inches wide. I tape down plastic visqueen over the area of the hull I'm repairing before I use it to form the new backing mold I'm creating. The backing mold will be made of 2 narrow 6-ounce fiberglass strips that overlap at the keel. All epoxy used in this repair is a 2-part West System epoxy, 105 resin and 205 fast hardener. I pour the epoxy onto the fiberglass backing mold strips and squeegee to remove the excess. I allow the epoxy to harden overnight and the next day the backing mold is easily pulled from its plastic backing. The thinness and flexibility of the backing will allow easy bending to fit into the hole I plan to cut in the hull. I cut the rough edges of the backing mold, rounding the corners and leaving it slightly larger than the hole to be cut. Step 2 is cutting out the damaged area. I start by drilling holes in the corners of the area I'm to cut to give my jigsaw a clean starting point, as I saw along the Sharpie line. I remove the damaged piece and use a small handsaw where necessary to cut through the thickest part of the keel. You can see here the split from the inside of the hull. A simpler repair would have been possible if I had been able to fiberglass from the inside instead of cutting it out. I test fit my fiberglass backing. You can see here that its thinness gives it the flexibility for relatively easy insertion. I draw another Sharpie line an inch outside the hole so that I can sand down a taper around the edge. This will allow the overlain fiberglass in subsequent steps to smoothly transition to the surrounding hull. The hole is cut and the hull is ready for the next step. Step 3 is epoxying in the backing mold. I lay the backing mold over the hole to verify proper alignment. I drill holes in the backing mold for a reason I'll explain in a minute. I clean the areas to which the epoxy will stick with acetone both on top and especially inside the hull. I place the backing mold in the hole and mix colloidal silica, number 406 from West Systems, with epoxy until I achieve a mayonnaise-like texture. I apply it to the top of the backing mold and the underside of the hull where the two will be adhered together. I thought I had a bright idea where I'd put expanding foam in the holes I drilled so that it would expand the backing mold against the cockpit, pressing the mold firmly against the hull for a strong bond. The strategy does not work. The foam instead expands to the side, so I quickly screw screws through the holes that press against the cockpit. The screw threads push the mold against the hull for the firm bond that I need. The following day, when the epoxy dries, the backing mold is firmly adhered to the inside of the hull. I then proceed to remove the screws. Step 4 is fiberglassing over the backing. First I file down the high spots, sand with a palm sander, vacuum up the excess dust, and clean with acetone. I trace the repair area onto fiberglass cloth. The fiberglass I apply here will consist of 7 layers of 6-ounce cloth which I pre-cut. I prepare 4 large pieces of successively 1 inch smaller strips and 3 2.5 inch wide pieces for extra keel reinforcement. I have traced the profile of the repair area on plastic over which I lay a piece of release fabric. Over the release fabric I lay the largest piece of fiberglass cloth. I prepare epoxy and saturate the fiberglass, removing the excess with a squeegee. I then lay a keel reinforcement strip and saturate it with epoxy, again removing the excess with a squeegee. Using the same process of laying down a strip and saturating and epoxying, I lay down the 2 remaining thin strips of keel reinforcement. I then lay down the next largest piece of fiberglass cloth and again saturate and squeegee out the excess. I follow with the third largest piece, saturate it, and squeegee, and as you can see the pattern is consistent, and I continue as I lay down the fourth largest piece of cloth and saturate and squeegee it. My repair piece now consists of 7 layers, 3 of which are keel reinforcement. I epoxy the top of the backing mold. I lift the repair piece off the plastic and place it face down with the release fabric face up. Including the backing mold, the overall repair is 5 layers with 9 layers of the keel. I squeegee out the excess epoxy. The next day, I peel the release fabric away to reveal the completed structural portion of the fiberglass repair. The next steps will be cosmetic. Step 5 is smoothing out the structural repair with fairing filler. First I sand down the rough spots of the repair. Once the dust is cleaned away, the area is ready for fairing. I mix a batch of epoxy and add West System 407 light structural fairing filler to a peanut butter texture. I spread the mixture evenly over the repair area. Once the fairing is dry, I attempt to sand it with a palm sander but find that I must use an 80 grit sandpaper on a sanding wheel on my drill to effectively sand it down. I file and then hand sand to get the repair to transition smoothly to the adjacent hull. I vacuum and clean with acetone to prepare for the next step. Step 6 is sealing with epoxy. I mix a white pigment into an epoxy mixture and apply the mixture with a foam brush over the entire repair area. This seals it while giving it a white base as preparation for paint. Step 7 is painting. I begin by neatly masking areas that need protection from paint, like my Sunfish logo, which I neatly cut around with an X-Acto knife. I mask the gudgeon, the entire aluminum rub rail, and the baler. I roll on a 1-part epoxy paint over the entire hull with a roller and knock off the bubbles by tipping with a foam brush. Once it is dried, I repeat rolling and tipping with 1 more coat for a total of 2. Once it is fully dried, I wet sand with 300 grit wet sandpaper. I clean and dry the hull. The repair is complete. At close inspection, it's not a factory perfect repair, but it's unnoticeable to the untrained eye, and I doubt that when I'm sailing the fish will be able to tell the difference. You can see the hull before and the repair afterwards. Pretty good for a first-time fiberglass repair. Again, the hull and the repair. The boat is done and ready for sailing.